Hello, I'm Dr. Randy Bach, and I'm honored as previously to have Charles Love with me. Today's December 4th, 2023. Charles, can you talk a little bit about your journey, your book, Race Crazy, how it has been basically the Nostradamus of the, say, BLM race movement, how your predictions have played out?
Well, thanks for having me again and talking about this. And you're right, things have progressed in some ways that I thought and others that I did not think of. I think what's mostly different, I saw some of it coming. I didn't think it would happen as fast as it did. But, you don't usually start these conversations with plug. But I would hope for our third conversation. And I would ask your viewers to go and check out my second book. I was just mentioning that to someone. It's called We Want Equality, How the Fight for Equality Gave Way to Preference. And as much as this book talked about how what was happening was going to get worse and how it's not beneficial to people, that book was written, I want to say, it came out in 17. So I wrote it in 16. So if you read that book thinking of 16, how I said all this stuff was going to happen, you're really going to say, well, wow, how did he know all this stuff? So it's very prescient and even more predictive than this one. But it's not that I'm all that bright. I look at things from a and sometimes it can be a flaw, right? Because I'm very logical. So I don't look at things. I don't have a team. Not only do I not have a political team, I don't think these problems are political problems. That's not to say that politics doesn't play an important part in both how these things progress and how to fix any problems you think that we may have. But I just say it's not the most important part and it's not the root of it all. So if you put all your eggs in that basket, you're not going to get to the kitchen to make an omelet because they're all going to crack before you get there. It's too far advanced of that. So when I wrote the book, this particular book, Race Crazy, I have it here. I went and got it because you mentioned you might want to talk about some specifics. So I wanted to be ready in case I want to flip through. But it was more specific. The reason I talk about the second book is the second book was written particularly about what happens when you put everybody in tribal teams and tell them that's the most important things to focus on, where that leads and how it's bad for everybody, even the people trying to help their team. Whereas this was specific to, I didn't even start it to after George Floyd died. So it was specific to the reactions to that. Right. So it was more, even the audience. I mean, lots of people get a lot of things from it, but I think the real audience was me screaming to white liberals, like a lot of my articles were at the time, to say, look, I like the fact that you're interested in what's going on and you're getting a wake up call because you didn't know this stuff happened because you didn't live in the circles, profiling, income gap, all this kind of stuff. So now you focus on it. That's totally fine. But if you think that you're going to help by giving money to this organization, you are sadly mistaken. So it's really to say, please be alert if you want to be woke if you want to. But now that you're awake, be smart about what you do with your energy, your time, and your money, because this ain't it. So that's what I was doing. So I was laying out really, systematically, logically, without a lot of emotion about why they're wrong, why even if you think they're right, why joining them is still wrong, and how
them in this case is them is Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter, particularly. I mean, on a larger scale, it was all the progressive movement. So you talk about how that ties into what we're seeing in the streets of New York and many other cities with the Palestinian support, and a lot of how we got into the gender thing. I write about that in there. But so largely the whole progressive movement, but specifically Black Lives Matter and what they were saying versus what they were doing. And we can get into that because you have more issues. So so it wasn't really so prophetic in the sense that I said, this is what Black Lives Matter, because at that point they had been around a few years, whatever. It was more about what they were going to do now that they got this massive influx of attention and money and influence.
Well, you say you're logical. I like to think I am logical. I think all of us, we have certain logic chips. Sometimes they're overridden by emotions, obviously, and team play and team sports. Two fans of opposite teams will look at a play and say that's pass interference. That's not clearly not. Oftentimes it's very difficult to extract our allegiances from our observations. I find that a lot.
Yeah. But just acknowledging that in yourself makes you better at it, because at least you know it. But some people don't even think that they have a blind spot.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. It is I do try to put myself up to that kind of secondary, logic loop, I guess. But as far as logic goes, there's kind of this very short piece of a computer code. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, which would I guess sabotage any bit of type of logic you want to do. If you have false premises coming in the beginning, garbage in, you're going to get false premises on the way out, garbage out. Right. So to that, I'd like to kind of get at first principles before we discuss things like the 1619 project and the shadowy levers behind BLM and so forth. The actual premise, I actually thought BLM was emanated from the Michael Brown gentle giant incident in Ferguson / St. Louis area. Darren Wilson, I believe. But you bring up that it was really the Trayvon Martin case in 2013. Was there like the groundwork for BLM, as it were, prior to that as well? And what did they do as for their GIGO loop, in a sense? How did they look at data? What data did they ignore? How did they parse it? And were they just waiting for, kind of a tripwire with everything kind of set in place to do the actions they did? Wow.
Well, how do I answer that without sounding like everyone else who's done it, from Wilfred Riley to Roland Fryer to everyone else? It is... I try to be fair and to assume positive intent. So I give people their argument. So it's not like they were wrong in the sense that they had nothing to be concerned about, right? Are there issues with policing in America? Of course, just like there's issues in every industry. It just happens. There's issues with restaurants in America. There's issues with schools in America. The problem with what they would argue, and they have a point, is that the difference is the food industry and the education industry doesn't have weapons and don't have police powers. Totally true. So if you say that you see something going on that's bad, you should speak out about it. That's a good thing. And if you think there's more power in numbers, so you need to coalesce with other people to do it, that's also fine. The problem is that maybe it's the advent of social media making it easier. So they're able to collect all of these bad situations and they link them together when they may or may not be necessarily linked. So you talk about Trayvon Martin. People make the mistake on these two sides, that the example you use of the sports analogy where the two teams see the play differently. The problem there is that we're arguing about the play, right? So was Trayvon, a menace? Was George Zimmerman, overzealous, or was he wrong? They're arguing that point. And BLM, if you look at the site at the beginning, of course, it's changed over the years, was about violence against Blacks from the state. But George Zimmerman wasn't a police officer, right? So whatever he was, to try to twist your views in order to make every situation fit is kind of the problem. So it wasn't about who's right or who's wrong. It was about using that argument to prove that the policing in America is bad. How do you know policing is bad in America? Because this guy who's not a police officer did this thing, right? So if you talk about garbage in, that's the problem. They add that to it. They isolate incidents. So Will and I was talking recently, and we said this. So I give them the argument. So usually with these, here's one thing I do differently. Whenever there's some high-profile police things, tasing, shooting, whatever, everybody, they go and analyze the tape like John Madden went boom, and then he went over here. I just assume the cop is wrong. Out the gate, the cop is wrong, and he did it because he's a racist. 100%. I don't even need to see the video. I know he's a racist. However, if I give you that, what you need to give me is that there are roughly 2.2 police officers, people with police powers in the country. They work full-time jobs, many of them overtime because we're short-staffed in many large cities. So let's call it 50 hours a week. So in their shift, we have to, on the low end, I've talked to some police officers, on the low end, they have 100 interactions in a day. So that's everybody that they turn to at the stoplight, not just the people that they pull over, the domestics they go to, all that, but it's everybody that they meet at the coffee shop, everybody that says, get out of here, pig, and their reaction to that. So all that, millions. So in a day, you're talking about, 100 million, 200 million interactions a day. Yet with the advent of the internet and police officers wearing body cam, how many of these violent cop on innocent bystander videos do we get? We get, and I'm stretching, 1 a week, 2 a month, 3 a month. So instead of arguing whether in that situation the cop used too much force, but in that one he was justified because of it, I just say, in a month, billions of interactions, you can only show me 15 videos. You fix those situations, yes, but I'm not going to waste my energy believing it's an epidemic. So that's the problem, is that we assume that because that happens, it happens. And then they say, well, what about the ones we don't know about? Well, wait a minute. Most large cities have body cams. People are walking around with their phones. And in the sense that you're talking about murder, there's no way someone will allow the police to kill their family member and not say anything about it. Have proof that the cop did whatever. It's on body cam footage, on the cell phone footage, and just not say anything. So you're hearing about the ones that people are saying because there's some clamor around it or some evidence against it or whatever the case may be. So to your original question, the problem, the garbage in is every situation is the same. Not to mention, lastly, that every situation is the exact opposite of the same, right? So you can say, take two situations that are almost the same, that are pretty identical, right? But you can still say, but that person was different, right? Their height and weight was different. So the police officers, relative to the police officers, so the reaction was different because in the one case, even though it was the same scenario, drunk, arguing, pushing back, snatching away, one guy was, 5'8", 170, and the cop was 6'2", 250, and the roles were reversed in the other one, so they reacted. Was it day? Was it night? Was it raining? How many cops were on site? All those situations are different. What city it was, the actual cop, that mindset is different. So to just look at the actual reason they pulled them over and say they're the same, they're never the same. So you can't really look at one and say that's the other, but they want to change policing in America based on these 5, 15, 20. Because think about it. If you ask them about it, they would probably mention the same 30 to 50 cases. But that's 30 to 50 cases over 10 or 15 years, right? So you're talking about 3 a year. So that's not enough, but they'll say it is. So that's the problem, I think.
Right. Now let's you were doing your kind of hypothetical. Let's say hypothetically that all of Black Lives Matter's precepts were adopted, and some of them have been, mind you. We can see how that's been going. So I would like you to evaluate what things they recommended, how those have worked out, and if we did, quote unquote, defund the police completely, would cui bono? Who benefits from that? Does the Black community writ large, which does not represent presumably only quasi felons and so forth, people interacting with the police in a negative fashion, but mom and pop, trying to open a store, trying to get back and forth to work, trying to have their kids walk safely in the neighborhood. Are they benefiting from the actions and reactions to, kind of police freeze, I would call it, police who don't want to engage, police who've been vilified, police who worry about getting sued for, smiling or smirking the wrong way. How have neighborhoods, which are never exclusively Black or whatever, how have neighborhoods benefited or not?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I told you I was pretty good at finding spots in here I wanted, so I'm going to go address that. But so you say, assume that everything they want is implemented. So the first thing that's important to say is, you remember the debate about a year ago where they were saying abolish the police, defund the police, and then when it got pushed back from even normal people who were liberal, but they're like, that's just stupid. They're like, well, abolish the police doesn't mean abolish the police, you idiot. Obviously, that's what they mean. They mean, no. I prove in the book that they literally mean abolishing the police. So set that aside. But the problem is worse than that, because they don't only mean police. So what I do in the book, if you haven't read the book, is I give my opinions, of course, but a lot of it is just them at their own word. Because I believe, to be fair to everyone, that everyone is taken out of context when they go on MSNBC or Fox News or the local news, because you only get 3 minutes to ask your question. They show a clip. So I said, well, that's not fair to Nancy Pelosi or Ted Cruz. I want to know what they really believe. You took the worst clip. So I go and I do whole paragraphs of what they say. So one of the things they say is that they need to address the resources, the deprivation of resources in public schools and things of that nature as stem from law enforcement. So they want to end policing, including ICE. So they want to abolish ICE. I think you heard that before. But criminalization in schools by removing all police, armed security, and security officers into schools, probation, metal detectors, and surveillance equipment in the schools, and divest funding from exclusionary discipline in school policing and ending corporal punishment. So I say that to say, you say policing aside. So let's walk this through. In New York, recently they had the situation where they followed the Jewish teacher to the school for going to the Israel thing, and they tried to attack her, and they had to sweep her off into another place. Then later on, they showed an earlier video from that same school where there was a fight, and some people, a security officer was trying, safety officer was trying to break it up, and they beat up the school safety officer. So and that's right. When you look at it through a political lens, you argue the wrong things. So people were debating that situation. Who threw the punch? What should have been done? They needed more officers left side. No, according to BLM, they want to abolish. So let's walk through this. I want the person who's liberal, but who's an honest person to think this. And they think policing is bad. They need to fix some things, and there's some racism. That's all fine. But listen to what they're saying. They're saying, take a general school. No safety officers in the school at all. Gone. Okay. Also, no metal detectors to walk through, so you can't catch the weapons. They want to eliminate no expulsion, and they want to reduce the suspensions. So if you can't punish the kids who are violent and bad, and you can't expel them because they have the right to school, you can't have adults and security officers to break up the fights at the school. But we all know the schools do they're going to have fights regardless. So Randall asked a really interesting question. Who benefits and does it hurt the Black community? Well, how exactly does it help kids? Think about your general high school. High school is a weird age group, right? People come in all sizes. Forget about race and demographics and financial backgrounds. You have people that look like they're 11-year-olds in high school, and you have people who look like linebackers in high school. But they're within 2 or 3 years old. They're all in the same building. How do you protect the undersized nerd from the bully if you have no process to discipline anyone? You can't put them out of school because you have restorative justice. If you haven't heard of that, that's where you punch me in the face and we come back to school and we sit down and we talk about how I felt about being punched in the face, and you talk about why you punched me in the face. And you need to understand me, but I also need to understand your background, the bullying you have at home, and all the things that cause you to do that, so we can come to an understanding. Yet you don't get kicked out of school. So how would that benefit anyone? Right? So it can't benefit anyone. Most logical people will say it can't. But the bigger problem is we were so focused on what does abolishing police mean, except for just looking at their own words. And they say police, ICE, probation, metal detectors, school safety officers, nothing. We want no security at all. Jails. They don't want jails. I have to find that. They literally say no jails. And then they say, if you got to have jails, we don't want any women in the jail. Nobody under 18 because they're 25 because their minds aren't developed, and no one over 60 because they're old and they can't harm anybody anyway. So now I can only lock up and no mentally ill people. So I can only lock up able-bodied men between 25 and 59. If I have a jail, which I don't want to have in hell. So it's just illogical. And they're literally openly asking for this stuff. It's in writing. Go to the website. Movement for Black Lives, which we'll get to, not Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. Well, that'll. I mean, I see the first consequence is every man who's arrested will automatically identify as a woman.
Boom. And if they don't let them out of jail, at least they can go to a women's prison and they can have an endless supply of dates. But that's okay.
It's wild stuff. I kind of wanted to touch on some of the. I made 16, let's say 20 slides, and you can kind of you can say click or something like that. I can go through some of the premises from your book.
Okay. Is this the BLM in their own words parts?
I don't think I got quite to that. This is more of the introduction.
Okay.
And This one here is, lowering standards. I don't know if you want to touch on this. Like this is, my Latin phrase is cui bono. There's not going to be a lot of Latin in this show. Probably just those two words. Who benefits? Who benefits from this?
I wrote a piece. I think I sent it to you the last time we talked. After affirmative action was struck down by Supreme Court, and so many people were lamenting, now a Black person will never go to college, right? It's the end of the world as we know it, right? And I had varying views to that. One was that I thought, if done right, there would be more Black kids in the Ivies. And I say that because the Black kids that are there now, let's do it from a pro-Black approach. If you really say, I like affirmative action because I think Blacks have been maligned in this country for so years and they need the help. They need access, right? We do want more than, well, the one thing limiting affirmative action will do, it will stop giving legs up to Black people who aren't Black, right? So and I think I quoted it in my piece. So a few years ago, most people don't know about this, that the Black students at Dartmouth went to administration and they were upset, demanding changes to the process, and they wanted transparency. They wanted to see the numbers. And you want to know what they demanded, people? Not fewer white people, not more Blacks on campus. They wanted to know why, when they would go up to the other brothers on campus and say, what's up? They had an accent, right? And they found out that 40% of the Blacks on Dartmouth's campus were immigrants. So they weren't American Blacks who needed the help. That affirmative action was in place to help because of the lineage of Jim Crow and slavery. They came over in 2020, 2019 to go to college. Right. And then of the percentage of the people who were what they call the ADOS Blacks, the vast majority of them were the children of wealthy people, doctors, judges, Barack Obama. So if the whole point was to help Blacks get in, those Blacks could get in anyway. Right. So they were like, well, so they created their own Black student union separate from the others. And they demanded that the school start to break down Black into ethnicity so they can know, does Black mean Black or does Black mean Nigerian, Ethiopian, whatever the case may be. So if the Black students understand this, why do not the white liberals and all these other people understand it? So my argument was, one, affirmative action, if done properly, would hurt the Black immigrants who get to use their Blackness to get in. So by default, you might not get a lot. You might get one or two more Blacks in just because you don't have a large influx of the Black immigrants in. Number two, you talk about the standards is, first of all, I hate to sound mean, but nobody has a right to go to a private elite school. It's called elite for a reason, right? So they're artificially keeping the numbers down low so you can get in, right? So there's plenty of people who meet the standards. Forget about lowering the standards. You went to an Ivy League school. You know this. Hate to call you out, you elitist. But there are plenty of people who get perfect scores on SATs and have, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Who have a GPA at 4.0 and do not get into Yale, correct?
That is true. That is
so what? So it's not the standard. There's people who meet the standard who don't get in. Why? It's not like the campuses of Harvard and Yale are like New York City, and they're packed up, and there's so many people. They have a density problem, and they don't have room. They can't admit they have no place to put 5 more students. It's because they limit it on purpose to stay elite. They want the best of the best. So if that's your goal, who gives you a right to go to that school? Nobody has a right to go to that school. Nobody. Rich, poor, whatever. Nobody has a right. Even if somebody who's donating money to get in because they don't put money on the bill, they still don't have a right. Somebody's deciding to get to allow them to come in. We can get to that. So because no one has a right to get in, and because some people have straight A's in a 1600 SAT and don't get in, how can you justify just saying we want 5 more Blacks in, so let's pick the Blacks? But to that, even if you do that, I said, fine, it's your school, do it. At least make those 5 Blacks meet the standards. So if you as a Black person want to see more Blacks at Harvard, then you need to help them in elementary school and middle school and high school.
Exactly.
To
point.
meet the grades. And then this is what I say. How about this? How about we demand that the Ivies, and I don't necessarily agree with you, but I would be open to this because I know the numbers wouldn't change that much. Here's a trade-off. We're in the arbitration room. We're going to do a trade-off. Those schools have to admit, create a high standard, say minimum 1,500 on the SAT, whatever score on the ACT, GPA plus whatever and pass the test, because there's grade inflation. So because you got a 4.0 doesn't mean you even know algebra, right? So they meet all those standards. And then I say the trade-off is every Black American with lineage in America, not an immigrant, gets in. I don't care what you got to do to make room, they get in. At an Ivy League school, every Black American gets in, right? Now, some pro-Black people who have respect for themselves will take that deal. The Black left won't. Right? No. Because they know enough of them won't get in. So they're like, oh, no, still, if the percentage isn't high enough, you still need to make other changes. I just said they all get in. So if 100,000 Blacks meet those standards, then those 10 schools need to find a way. Well, it's more than 10 because they don't just mean the Ivy. They also mean Stanford. They mean other, the 1A tier, right? So you're probably talking 20 schools, right? So they need to admit them. But they would never do that because we know that we're not doing enough to make sure
it happens on the nurturing side. Yeah, no, I mean, I've had so many dreams over the years of playing in the NBA. I mean, literally dreams. Like I go to sleep and I can like soar. I'm dunking over people because I watch a fair amount of basketball. I don't know, it seeps into my brain. But nobody has ever like put out a program for, kind of like, dribbling challenged people such as myself to be in the NBA. We have standards. You don't want to watch the game if they had to take a certain number of Armenians, a certain number of Canadians, a certain number of people in wheelchairs or whatever, just because that is somehow the population of that town, and conversely, and if you do, have some height challenges and athleticism challenges, you want to be in the NBA, then you work at it really, really hard. I don't think Larry Bird was hugely compared. I mean, I think he's athletically talented, don't get me wrong, but compared to a lot of the other players of his era, like James Worthy and Magic Johnson, I don't think he was as physically smooth as a lot of players. He didn't have the, jumping skills and whatnot, kind of the white man can't jump kind of syndrome in a way, but the guy worked it a lot. He was doing the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, whatever it is.
Hours, right.
Probably every week, he squeezed in 10,000 hours. And so the guy worked it his whole life. And then when he's there, he can do that stuff. So he became like fluent in the language of basketball. You can become fluent in the language of calculus and fluent in the language of French, or whatever, if you work it and if that is your goal. But if that's not actually your primary goal, it's a much harder thing. And if you don't start at a very early age, it's hard. And most of the stuff is kind of unfortunately baked in the cake because of some of the fracturing of the black households versus other demographics. And I just want to, if I can squeeze in one, side comment. When you were talking about kind of the kind of admission preferences for, historic, American Blacks versus, Nigerian transplants and whatnot. Every year there's a feel-good story in the, People magazine or whatever. The kid who gets into every college he applies to.
All the schools. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he gets in, I don't know why he bothered to apply to 20 because he probably knew he was going to get into, he probably wants to go to Stanford or Harvard anyway. So he probably could apply to 5, Princeton, et cetera, maybe Yale, whatever. But invariably, it's some Nigerian kid in Long Island. This is what it is, who's got an intact family. He's going to church. He's studious and it's probably his folks at home. I used to do a lot of immigration exams and the Nigerians were different. People don't like stereotypes, but there are kind of group characteristics. And the Nigerians were very hard driving. They showed up and they had that, immigrant kind of pushiness, a lot of things that get, attributed to various other racial groups and whatnot, ethnic groups. And they were always looking for a bargain. They were cutting you on what you had said. They were very meticulous about it and they were pushy, and they wanted stuff yesterday. And I could just imagine growing up in that kind of household. I mean, I sort of did grow up in that kind of household. It wasn't acceptable. My mother, when I was in elementary school, like 5th, 6th grade public school, they had the class auditorium thing at the end of the year, and some kid won the most improved student. And she turned to me and hissed. She says, "I want you never to win that award." And we got out after him like, that kid is great. Why would I not want to win the most improved award? She said, if you win the most improved award, that means you weren't good the first year to begin with. You can never be most improved because you have to be improved all the time.
Wow.
Okay, fine. I mean, all of the three of us, her three sons went to Ivy League schools, whatever. We've had varying degrees of success in the world, but it's like, I'm not saying she was a tiger mom or a leopard mom or whatever, and my dad as well. But it's like, we didn't have wealth. We lived in a 1-bedroom rent-controlled apartment. But the concept was, you're going to succeed because we're not succeeding. You're going to do better than us. We have to. We're going to be your rocket fuel. You better be a good rocket.
Right.
And fine. I don't know if that's good advice or not good advice, but it is there. And if you want to do that thing where you become the person who can absorb the studies, you kind of need that impetus at home, and you need the kind of cohesion where people are encouraging that. And that's, sort of things is missing, and giving somebody something that other people have kind of been, more programmed, for better, for worse, to doing. I mean, I don't think intrinsically, Asians, which are like, multiple different ethnicities, dozens, if not hundreds of different ethnicities, we call just Asians,
right,
reduced to that. I don't think there's anything particular and I don't think there's much that coincides between South Asian Indians and Koreans or Japanese and Chinese. I mean, I think they've been at war with each other over the decades, and somehow we hear they're all Asians. They all do better. Well, what is that? What's that special sauce aside from sriracha?
It's a good sauce, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't think it makes you do calculus, but it's good.
Yeah. So there's something there, and I don't see that there's any issue with having that nurtured in amongst blacks. You mentioned kind of like the kids who are getting into Dartmouth or whatever. They're coming from families with doctors. Kind of the Bill Cosby show.
Right.
Aside from his fall from grace, but that kind of prototype. Alvin Toussaint was the advisor. Yep. Anyway, so that, I'm going to segue back to all things you. Yep. Sorry for my diatribe, but let's. I kind of wanted to touch on. I'm not sure we're going to get to all of these. The progressive racism movement, an extreme left-wing movement organized to re-engineer society by judging and treating people according to their skin color. I'm not sure if it's this previous slide. Yeah, here, this slide here. Professor Hasbrook, I'm not sure who that is, decided to go in a different direction. He posited that we need to implement vote reparations by counting the votes of Black Americans twice. And this is this paragraph that preceded your paragraph here. Borrowing from the radicals themselves, we must resist. And so what is that resistance? What do you think about double voting, reparations, reparations in general? And have we kind of proceeded down that route? And again, the cui bono question.
Well, so the reparations has been pretty hot as of late. I ironically wrote a piece about this too. And a lot of these things, because I'm not on a team and because I'm very logical about things, what funny thing, so I do a podcast and I write articles periodically. And I always joke that what makes me different is the sense that I, like most people, have an opinion on everything, right? But 90% of the topics I don't care enough about, so I really don't care, right? So that's what makes me look different. Like some conservative may be arguing a point. I may agree with them, but I'm like, I don't care. So like when they all talk about school choice is so important, not really, not a big deal. I'm not against it, but you don't think that's important? Because I'm concerned about the culture being so bad that all of the schools are bad because we're moving in the same way. So today, I feel like you give a poor kid in the hood a voucher so they can go to a private school. They can go to an elite private school. It's going to be just as woke and as bad as the other school. The academics might be a little bit better and the building might be better, but they're still going to tell them they're oppressed. You didn't fix anything. I'm like, Until you fix the culture, that doesn't really matter to me. Now, I'm not against it, so I'm not going to stand in your way. And shockingly, it seems weird, but that's how I am about reparations. I don't think it's the right thing to do, and I don't think it will necessarily help. A lot of people that I agree with on a lot of things are big reparations proponents, and you'll never see me argue with them because I'm like, I don't really care that much. In the sense that I think is bad at how you put it out and how you do it and who you give them to and all that kind of stuff, how it gets complicated, that's their problem anyway. But on the premise that it's owed, I agree it was at some point, but not necessarily now. So for instance, I argue that reparations, I agree with reparations in the sense that I think it would have been better than affirmative action, right? Mm-hmm. I think reparations, so I'm being that clear. So that's why I'm like different from most people. I think reparations is a far superior fix to the problems in history in America than affirmative action. Let me explain why. Because affirmative action, while both aren't perfect, affirmative action explicitly did the opposite of what we just fought to do. So the Civil War fought to end slavery. We did this long march through Jim Crow to fight to make blacks equal, to say we should treat everyone the same. We passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to put in the Constitution that all people should be treated the same, equally, regardless of their skin. And then the next day, we pass laws, affirmative action, saying we can treat people different. Now, take all the emotion out, take the time. I know there's nuances, but at the time, you can't start a race, move them up to the starting line, but never give them skills. All that stuff is true. I'm just speaking logically from the letter of the law. You cannot pass a constitutional amendment and have this strong fight. People wearing sandwich boards saying, I am a man. Treat me the same. And then say, we can treat, it's Animal Farm, but some people are more equal than others, right? So we're going to say, go to the Supreme Court, and then the suing party, the plaintiff will lose because they said, well, it's okay. Yes, you got fired because it's a union shop, and the rule was last one in is the first one to go, but the last one in was the first black person hired, so we're going to leapfrog him and fire you. That's kind of wrong, but you understand why we do it. Look at what used to happen to blacks. Well, that's not what the Civil Rights Act just said. So do you mean the Civil Rights Act, or do you not mean the Civil Rights Act? Right? So that's why I say reparations would have been better. Whether people who are pro-reparations will disagree with me is I don't mean now. I'm not owed anything, right? You can argue, we'll get to that, my mom, but I asked my mom even said no to herself. She's 87. So slaves 100%. Right, but they're all dead. So what I say, again, I go to the bargaining table. I just want the problems fixed. So I say, how about this? How about we negotiate? And then we're going to get to who does it help? And we say, okay, we're going to parse it out. We're going to do lineage. We're going to say X. We got to draw a line of how many generations. And we're going to say, boom. So if you're still alive and you suffer from Jim Crow, you get a check. You get a smaller check, you get a check. Right? If you're the child of that person, but you can sell directly, like they stole my house, you still get a check. Other than that, unless yours is specific that damage, you don't get a check as a child. Everybody who lived through it gets a check, but a smaller check. And then, you say, this is how we're going to do it. And then you draw a line and you say, this is the end. I wouldn't be mad about that. Right? I'm not saying it's what we should do, but I'm not going to waste my energy. It'll be a small pool of people. What my problem is when I hear people argue that all Black Americans are owed reparations. Right. So LeBron James, Oprah Winfrey, everybody else. And it was this nuance. So we talk about slavery, and the whole point is the what do they call it when they say that the generations after slavery are still dealing? What do they always say? It's they have a word, the Nicole Hannah-Jones, a specific phrase she uses, right? But if I give them that argument that 4 or 5 generations away, you're still dealing with the problems of it. What about the 500,000 people who were never enslaved? Because we forget they exist, but they have lineage to blacks in America. Are we going to give them reparations? What is the process to figure out who is or not? And then that's ignoring the madness of all of the mixed children and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just saying, so to say all blacks should get X, that's one thing, right? So that's the problem with doing it. So I don't think it'll help one, because it would also be the same as a lottery winner. When you see these lottery winners and they win all this money and they lose all the money. I just watched a movie yesterday about a woman who won a lot of money, $190,000, and she was homeless and broke in a couple of years. But unless you teach people what to do and how to get ahead, how to properly think, critical thinking skills, and how to do the basics, will they hold on to this money? Now, granted, they're talking about giving them a lot of money. So if it's a lot of money, maybe yes. And then I also write, there's a third factor. It's what it does to the country. So is it worth it? Everything has a cost. So you give every Black person $5 million, right? It helps them individually, but what does it do to the country? Because I can put myself in other people's shoes. So I know if I'm any normal white person, but if I'm definitely a poor white person who's struggling in this economy, and the culture is such that you have privilege just because you're white, but I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm struggling. I got problems with the system. I can't get ahead. And you're telling me I got this privilege and I don't see it. And now on top of that, you give 10% of the population millions of dollars. you are going to probably permanently damage the country beyond repair. It's not the same country anymore. So the whites would be like, fine, you get your money, but I don't want anything to do with you anymore. So at the same time, they're saying diversity is our strength. You're going to lose all that diversity because now we're all being in our own little silos because you will create the racial angst you're trying to eliminate. So that's another problem with reparations.
Yeah, no, I learned a new term. It's called stochastic terrorism.
Oh, yes. That's the new one. Yes, I've seen people talk about that.
You want to touch on that?
I just hear them talking about it. I think you could probably explain it better than me.
Well, yeah, I'm going to probably leave it there for people to look up on their own. But basically, it's this kind of you keep pushing a certain kind of narrative against a group that has not been terroristic, and they become terrorized in a sense passively, and then you basically are growing the terrorism that you didn't want. So it's akin to what you're saying there, that you keep giving one group something, a benefit, and you keep railing against some other group terrorizing you. Eventually will grow the terrorism that you were predicting, because you have been disfavorable. They say that.
Well, I liken it, since we're talking to race, I liken it to the fact that since we've been talking about race so much for the last 2 or 3 years, I think it's going to cause more racism, right? Because you're telling people I think the paragraph you just put up says something about all this is done under the guise of eliminating racism. So to eliminate racism, because we think racism is bad, what they propose to do is, how about we focus on race all the time, right? In every facet, just keep pushing the differences. We're different. You're different. What's the difference between your white skin and black skin? Look at that map. What's the difference between that map? What does Africa say? What is the difference in the differences? And then you're shocked that these kids are only focused on differences, right? Because that's all you talk about. So well, you tell me it's not important, but you talk about it every day, so it must be important.
Yeah, and I think about, and I don't want to be misquoted on this, everybody, but I think Barack Obama is essentially a paradigm of stochastic terrorism. He was supposed to be the racial healing of the country, and people, I think, felt absolved. They were doing some kind of, they liked the guy. He was personable, whatever. As Joe Biden said, he was kind of like which is one of these left-handed compliments. Wow, what an articulate.
Oh, he's so articulate. Yeah.
How did he say it?
Yeah. He was like, he's clean and articulate.
Yeah.
It's also clean, which was kind of weird.
Yeah. So, but he was supposed to be solving the race problem by virtue of his presence, and he never stopped harping on the thing. The quote unquote beer summit. We've had these incidents. Really, I think going back to the Obama era, where Henry Louis Skip Gates came back inebriated from an airplane and couldn't get into his own, home, but is, in Cambridge, and he's breaking into his own house. I don't think that's a matter of debate. Like, he couldn't get in, he couldn't find his key, blah, blah, blah. And he somehow, jimmying open his own front porch window, which he has the right to do, owning the place, but it's not obvious to anybody observing it that is the case, And so he got picked up, but I think, blue, green, purple, or polka dotted, and striped, if somebody's like jimmying a window, he looks like a burglar. And yet the policeman, got railroaded. And then eventually they had this, beer summit, as if, again, kind of like your process of the bully and the bully, the bully.
Restorative justice.
Yeah, restorative justice. And, they're going to talk it out over beer, which I don't really see. I think Obama would have been more honest if he had called it a Chardonnay summit. I don't really see him as a beer guy, but anyway, this has been going on for a while, and I think clearly the opposite of healing our racial wounds. I think a lot of people have found that picking at it brings whatever type of reaction or suppurative, pussy process that by which they personally benefit, and by group. And I kind of would like to maybe segue back into some of the people who have benefited. In the news lately is what is his name? Henry Rogers.
My buddy Henry.
Ibram, aka Ibram Kendi, and Patrice Cullors and so forth, and Black Lives Matters. But it seems like their particular Black lives mattered even more than anybody else's, and they took some financial solace along the way. But maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about, kind of how these groups have evolved or devolved over time. Is their kind of credo and credence and credibility reduced because of their, dipping into the well, buying themselves triple homes and so forth, and absconding with funds?
Unfortunately, no. The quick answer is only because them specifically, probably a little bit. But the problem is, it's amazing how quickly people shift. I was on a podcast recently and somebody said that, how quickly it shifted from them and their organizations, their credo, their anti-racism, to the premise of, so fine, I can just dismiss Henry. But what he was saying is still good. He's just a bad person because he took some money. But anti-racism is good. But BLM, Black Lives Still Matter. It's just Patrice probably shouldn't have bought a mansion. So no, it doesn't really change anything. People still say, but I still believe what they said. I just don't believe them. So it doesn't really change it. Now, the problem is you keep asking, the theme throughout is, who does it help? I think it hurts people because it makes people who otherwise would say, regardless of our flaws in the country, they're doing well, or they have done well, or they have an opportunity to do well. They think that they can do well. They don't think anyone in the country is holding them back. But at the same time, they believe them. But how can you believe them? They're telling you somebody in the country is holding you back, right? They can't connect the two. They don't connect the dots. They'll say, no, I think, do you think that if you worked hard, anybody, regardless of race, who works hard can achieve something? Vast majority of blacks would say yes. Do you believe that racism is holding you back? And then someone would still say yes. But I thought you just said, I mean, it's still more than half would still say it's not holding them back. But let's say 48% say it's holding them back, but 83% say they can achieve. Well, that doesn't really mesh, because if you can achieve, but you said they're holding you back, so how can you achieve? Well, maybe they think, well, I'll achieve, but I'll achieve less. I don't know if you heard one of my, and he says some logical things. People beat up on him because he's kind of liberal, but he says some logical things, Tyler Perry. But one of the things he said that really bothered me, he was doing an interview with Anderson Cooper during the Summer of Love BLM thing. And a lot of stuff he said was really logical. He was like, things are more nuanced than they are. He said, we need to support the police. We need to keep they need better training. But we need more police, not a left. He was being chided by some of the black community because he donated to some pro-police charities. So he was saying a lot of the right things. And it would have been perfect if he stopped there. But at the end, I keep bringing it up because it's so bad. Anderson Cooper asked him something. And he was bragging about the fact that his family is traced his family, and his family had been slaves on this plantation. And now he's wealthy. He owns it. And his production company sits on land that his former ancestors were slaves on. And now he owns all this land. A wonderful American story. But then at the end, he puts out, by default, I'm a liberal, I got to put something out there. And he says, I'm very successful. I've been blessed. I've had all these things going out there. You can make it in America. However, there's still some racism, and there's still some doors that are closed to blacks, because imagine where I'd be if I was white. Says the multimillionaire. He says, imagine. So think about that, people. He's saying, imagine where I'd be if I were white. He's implying that even though he's rich and successful, man, if I was white, I'd be Elon Musk. Well, the truth of the matter, if you're being honest, is likely if he were white, I'm not saying he'd be homeless, but he wouldn't be wealthy, right? Because part of the drive in him was probably because of the difficulty he went through. Maybe he doesn't have the difficulty. But beyond that, for those who don't know how he got rich and famous, he started off what we call the Chitlin circuit, right? Going around to small venues to only black audiences doing his Medea character, right? Like these specifically black comedies, right? He wouldn't be able to do that if he was white. There is no white version of that. There's no place where you can go around and do trailer park white trash theater and just go around making fun of white trash, right? So if he were white, he wouldn't be Tyler Perry. So he wouldn't be richer, but I'd argue he'd be less financially, wealthy.
Yeah, I have to say that. I mean, I'm not. I don't see color, but I've been told I'm white, and I'm not even. I'm not Elon Musk either. I'm a bright enough guy. I was a chemistry and physics major, and I'm not Elon Musk. There are a lot of. I mean, pretty much. I think 7 billion people on the planet who are not Elon Musk. It's like
7 billion. Right. I think we're up to 8 now. Right.
Okay, fine. Well, there are many
But
people
not only
who
that,
aren't.
I was just telling my son this. My son was asking, he's 7, he's asking about rich people and billionaires. He thinks that, I'm like, he was like, who's the richest person in the world? And Alexa was like, Elon Musk. I was like, you know how many people? Well, he's 10 times richer than all these other billionaires. Let me show you how rich he is. But you know how many billionaires there are? He's like, I don't know. I was like, I would guess it's like 15, 20, say the world, 15, 20 grand. He has, I think Alexa says like 20,000 people. So that's 20,000 in the whole world, 8 billion people. There's only 20,000 people who are billionaires. And in America, it's probably 90. Maybe now it's probably a couple hundred, but you talk about a couple hundred people out of 340 million people. Most people aren't billionaires. I mean, it's not the norm. Even upper middle class, you're talking about 1% or so, right? You're not talking about, you're talking about 40 million people. The rest of us are all just regular. I mean, everybody can't be like you, Randall.
No, it would be kind of challenging if they were.
Right. So I mean, that's the thing. People are driving to be something that no matter how much drive you have, most people aren't going to achieve.
Yeah, no, it's true. So I wanted to pop this slide up, and I'm not going to get to all of my slides, all your slides.
Yeah.
M4BL, the movement for Black Lives, an ecosystem of individuals and organizations, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's see if they're still out there. I haven't been on the site in a while. Go on.
Yeah, no, it's on the site. It seems like all these intersectional groups and so forth. Who are they? What is it? Are they still kind of motivating BLM? And
it's still there.
What's their agenda?
So it's odd, mostly because nobody talks to them. So in the book, I talk about how I found out about it because I didn't know about it. So I'm doing this research. And I'm trying to find out all the real nitty gritty about BLM, like what they truly want us to. Can't find anything. I just see marches and there. I'm like, what? So I'm looking. I can't find anything. Where's the money? Everybody says trace the money. So I'm like, where's the money? So I stumble upon this article that says BLM got like $100 million over 5 years. This is one of the first big dollar amounts they got, right? Except it didn't say BLM. I was like, oh. But, I'm a technical guy, and I'm like, well, technically it's close, but it doesn't say that. It says that they gave the money to the Black Lives Matter Foundation or something, right? I'm like, what is that? So then I keep looking, and I click on the site, and it takes to the Ford Foundation, who's the fiscal. So I keep going down, and when I find the actual organization, it's the Movement for Black Lives. I'm like, well, who are they? So I go to the website, and I find all this stuff. They have policy plans written out already. They have demands for all these different things. It's 20 times, 50 times more information on the Movement for Black Lives site than it is BLM. Yet you never heard of them. They have all these organizations, like 140 organizations that they say in the network. So they provide funding and support and talking points and things of that nature. But you never see an article about them, right? Yeah, that's them. The good old Movement for Black Lives. Let's go to where it says, what does it say? I can't see your little hamburger to see what they want. It's like a demand. Oh, they're black lives. Something about, there we go. Let's go to Vision for Black Lives. That's it. And look at all that. The end the war on blacks, invest in diverse reparations, economic justice, all that. They have a list of demands for Congress to do all these things. They have political stuff. They have election stuff. They have all kind of stuff. Go to the end the war on black people. And then they have all this pie. Scroll down a bit. There's a pie that says, see, there you go. It's all the things they want to do. It's a preamble. Look, it's like a constitution. And then all those pillars is women, is black youth, is trans people, is disabled people, is death penalty, in the death penalty, it's all these things they want to end. In the war on drugs, in surveillance in the black community, in pre-child detention. And underneath one of those, they have a list of all the things, like, here's the problem and here's the demand. You don't see this stuff on the Black Lives Matter. Like, click one of them so they can see how much stuff is there. Go down one. Do the one that says demilitarization. Okay, that's fine. Go down. And then you'll see, anyway, yeah, do that one. Let's see that one. And then when you go down, you'll see, it'll say like the problem, the issue. And then it's that, and then it's the demand. And then they got a list of demands, right? And then they have, you see the key federal legislation. That means someone has written legislation that they written up information they want to give to a friendly congressman so they can put it in the, get it onto the floor. Now, contrast this, Million Hoodies, to go to the BLM website. There's nothing on there. Go to BLM website. There's no detail. Like, you can dig into this website for a long time, reading papers, reading white paper, reading all this stuff. Go to BLM. and it's nothing. It's a shell of it's not real. There's nothing on there. Right? It's just like we still want to defund the police, little articles. That's July of 23. See, there's nothing on there. There are no demands. There's nothing.
Yep.
If you go to the top, it says what does it say? It says something about.
Yeah.
See,
well, clearly this has more of the thrust.
Yeah. That's what all the detail is. So Black Lives Matter, you can't go to that site. If you want to know what they really believe, you got to go to the Movement for Black Lives, BL.com. And so that's what I talk about. I talk about it's good because it's clear. There's no parsing words. You can't come away from their website and say, well, defund doesn't really mean what we think. No, they're really clear. One line literally says, we are abolitionists. It's so funny. I put that in the book. So I took chunks of it and just put it in the book. Like, this is what they say in context. And then it's a bunch of, it's not even about policing. It's all, we affirm gender queer XYZ. Like, what do they got to do with police? I'm not knocking you, but I thought your organization was about police. We put queer voices forward. Really? That got to do with the police? Yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah. So I kind of want to, we're rounding out the hour. I'd like to touch on a couple things, a little bit of background. One is this piece from your book about Roland Fryer, Harvard economics professor, who I think, to use the phrase, I think he stepped off the plantation a little bit. Claudine Gay, who was the dean then, now she's the president. Didn't
he got in a little bit of trouble for this.
I mean, I'm not sure. Was it a dating thing or?
Supposedly, yeah.
Yeah. But
But they took his research away. He stayed, but they basically neutered him. They didn't allow him to do research anymore.
Yeah. So Eric Adams, he was railing against. I'm going to come to a point here, but he was recently railing against the Biden open border policy, and and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he's got this sexual claim against him. From 30 years ago.
And the money with Turkey.
Yeah, and so all this stuff's being, and mind you, people in glass houses ordinarily shouldn't throw stones. So, Joe Biden with Hunter Biden and Jim Biden and all this kind of China money, whatever, he's the one throwing stones, presumably by proxy, at Eric Adams, who all of a sudden decided to lay off his anti-open border stuff. He's not going to go to the open, he's not going to go down there to Washington and protest in front of Congress or whatever. He's changed his tune right away. So I think these kind of methods of getting at people are very effective. I don't know if that was the case with Roland Fryer, but just to get to the point that he made here, he did an empirical analysis of racial difference. This is kind of backtracking a little bit to your point. His comprehensive study examined over 1,300 shootings spanning 15 years in 10 cities. Officers were he found, cut to the chase, for instance, in the last census, officers in Houston were about 20% less likely to shoot if the suspects were black. He did not reinforce the quote unquote narrative that blacks are being targeted. There's all, again, just to kind of do stream of consciousness here. There's all this talk about genocide in Palestine. The Israelis have been really bad at Arab genocide, because I guess when they took the place over in 1967, Gaza, I think there were 100,000 Arabs there, and now there's circa 2 million. That means you're bad at genocide. These Houston cops are bad at black genocide if they're not, shooting blacks preferentially. It's just kind of and I'm saying these things, satirically. I don't know if you want to talk on that at all, and whether that kind of information doesn't really get around. Lies travel the world while the truth is getting its pants on. Nobody seems to hear about this kind of stuff.
Well, I think what's most important about Roland Fryer, because it adds to his credibility, and it adds to the problem with the BLM and the police reform movement, is the other piece of what he said. What you said is true. He did this study, found that blacks weren't being hunted; they were less likely to be shot. But he said, and I was at one of the events where he talked about this in detail, and he says, now on the other side, blacks are far more likely to be like pushed up against the wall, or roughed up by the cops, that kind of deal. And that happens, right? So the brutality part does happen because it's probably like, they're dealing with this every time. It's emotional. They're mad, or maybe they're racist, whatever the case may be. But when it comes to shooting, they understand that they're taking a life. They don't want to take a life. They understand that the career is on the. There's more consequences to that than just maybe giving a guy a shove. So they'd be more likely to do that. But the reason that's important is because, one, it proves that he's being honest. He will tell you he went into this knowing that cops were, shooting blacks indiscriminately. All he wanted to do was just get the evidence to prove it, right? And to his credit, he found the difference and he published it. Lots of people do that. It's just that when they find out that they were wrong, they just drop it. And he's like, hey, I'm excited this is not the case. But the reason I like the other part is because it goes to the BLM type thing. Because if you really wanted to fix policing, you would stop lying and saying they're hunting black men down and shooting them, and talk about the fact, but they are punching them in the face more often, and that's a bad thing, right? So focus on what really is happening, right? And fix that, as opposed to trying to fix the myth that they're shooting people, because you can't fix it because it's not true. And they make it black, which is to say, you don't want police officers being bullies to anyone, correct? So why are you saying they're bullying black people? Just say there's a problem with how they approach people when there's an incident. They need to be more respectful and manage their anger from that standpoint.
Fair enough. I would maybe even push back slightly on that, because I think there are cultural differences surrounding violence. And BLM actually brings this up itself, or maybe that this is quoting from your book, so I'm not sure where this came from, BLM or that other group, Movement for Black Lives. But
yeah, they're all the same. They're the same.
I'm sorry, I didn't post it. Black women in the U.S. face some of the highest rates of interpersonal and community violence, including family, interpersonal, sexual violence, corrective rape, so forth.
Right.
So they're talking about how they want this fixed. Who's going to fix this, first of all? But I think it bespeaks that there are probably different levels of household domestic violence and violence as a solution to issues, so forth, that happens within certain communities. I would imagine that in, Sharia land, there's probably more, cases of unspoken domestic violence than there are in, amongst, I don't know, you pick the different group, right. Presbyterians in Idaho. I don't really know.
But I guess you fix it by getting rid of the police, right? That's what they say.
Right. So I kind of saw this slide as an admission against interest. Right. Because they're acknowledging that, they want this problem fixed. They want women of this, black women to get less domestic violence. So that getting rid of the police is going to help that. How? A, and B, does that?
And jails. There are no jails. Remember, there are no jails.
Chris Rock had this thing in the 90s, had a quick little comedy routine, how not to get beaten up by the police. This is, after Rodney King, how not to get beaten up by the police. Have you seen, I assume you've seen that comedy routine. And so it's like, I can do a Chris Rock, but I'm going to try to hold back.
You keep saying that. You told Lou that you could do one. Yeah, anyway. Say it one more time. You got to break out the Chris Rock.
So Lou, you don't want to get beaten up by black. So what you got to do with this? Basically, stop cursing at them. Don't take out your gun. Don't do this. Don't threaten.
But he disrespected my manhood, and he can't check me in front of my boys.
Right. And so don't do that. You're not going to get beaten up. So, so I think with interactions, especially now that there's kind of been this reverse, kind of like special potion that people have. They know they're being videoed and they know they have a potential of making money. They are going to probably be provoking police even more. So it's the anti-Chris Rock. It just seems like, there's going to be a different level of potential violent threat in certain interaction with the police. And so,
and it's going to be worse if you don't do anything about it, is what you're
saying. I'm just speaking to Roland Fryer's observation that there's more people being pushed up against the wall. I think they're probably different.
But you're okay with blacks being pushed?
Well, I think they're different community level adherences towards the Chris Rock precepts. I think the reason he had to make that video is that there might be, from the kind of the black urban underclass, more resistance, whether, well-deserved or are coming from a good place or not, against the police, historically, and now probably added because there's some potential secondary benefit towards making, a
But I'll say this. I'll say it's bad on both sides because you're not wrong, but I think Roland also proved that some of the cases were unprovoked. So in those cases, it's just doesn't make it right. It's more of a cop dealing with this every day, and you do this every day. You get it's kind of like what you say, profiling, but not like pulling people over. It's just like I see a kid in a certain situation, a certain neighborhood, in a certain clothes, a certain race, and a certain age, and unless they prove the opposite, I assume certain things. Look, I'm on these streets every day. I know that guy's a gangbanger, so I need to approach him as such. Or if you don't approach them with your chest out, they're going to challenge you as a cop. So they may be wrong, but some of them do come up with their mindset. So that's the problem with the cops. The cops are wrong. They are doing it even without being provoked. However, like the paragraph you put up that said this is going to make it worse. How you solve this if you believe this. I do believe it gets worse because now we're paying people out and forgiving bad behavior. So You get mobs of people who loot. Yeah, what are you going to do? They're frustrated. It's not their fault. Do it in Chicago. Brandon Johnson will say, well, it's not their fault. How dare you put down the kids, right? So then you embolden them to do more. I don't know if you saw this. I don't know if it happened in the last couple of days, but I just saw it in the last couple of days. But Rayshard Brooks, he's the guy that got killed in Atlanta because he fell asleep driveway, and they burned the Wendy's down. So they arrested some people. I didn't know that. Good news. They arrested some of the people who burned down a Wendy's. So now they met their day in court, and they got released with a $50 fine.
Oh my God!
For burning down a Wendy's. So you think I'd be more likely to burn down a Popeyes now?
Yeah. Well, there's also
get more resistance because you're telling people the resistance is okay. So if the police are doing it on their own without the resistance, you need to correct that. But you're going to get more resistance when there's fewer police. Right. You're demonizing police, and you're telling people it's okay to punch a cop. I know you saw in New York the guy walking around with the police hat he picked up that was on fire. That's on video. I mean, they're not going to do anything with him.
But I got to ask you a question separately. Did you see, speaking of stochastic terrorism, did you see the riot that erupted after the 17 teenagers beat up the white kid, the 17 black teenagers? You familiar with that?
I saw that, but I didn't see the riot.
Exactly. But soon enough, the stochastic terrorism, there will be. If those things don't get, I don't know if anybody has been prosecuted really from that, but you will see it. I mean,
but it's not even just the violence. I know this stochastic terrorism is going to the extreme, but it doesn't have to get to the extreme. It doesn't have to be violent. People would just John Galt, right? They'll just stop donating. Wealthy whites who like, I feel bad about what's happening in the black community, and they donate to these, or will stop doing that, right? People will stop going to certain areas and stop spending money in certain areas. So they will go that way. They'll just say, they will internalize. They'll start, well, if they want to buy black, this buy black day, then I'm going to buy white, right? It'll be little things like that. It doesn't even have to be violent, because it's fracturing the country. So at the same time, like I said earlier, they're screaming diversity is our strength. And then they're damaging diversity because they're making us go into our own little groups. Mm-hmm. So that's the bigger problem. I mean, the terrorism thing may happen, but it won't happen a lot. I get in debates with a lot of people because I do not believe we're anywhere close to some racial civil war. I think it's nonsense. It's never going to happen. But every time they post a clip, it's like, oh, we're getting closer to race war. No, we're not. Get out of here with that foolishness. We're not going. So, but will there be occasional pop-offs like that? Sure. But I don't think that's the bigger threat to the country. It's the bigger threat that we look at it like we're all different and separate.
Yeah. So since you're knowledgeable on every topic, I'm going to post this one. It seems semi-topical. Have you seen, you know about this Irish Lives Matter?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar
talking about the protests?
Well, not only that, but the guy, people who are posting this are being prosecuted for hate crimes. If you post Irish Lives Matter.
That sounds about right. Well, it's not in the U.S. As much as we have our fights about free speech, they have laws in Germany and other countries in Europe that you can't say something. It's against the law to be a Holocaust denier. It's against the law to say something about trans people. It's against the law. So it's the law. You all were okay with it. Go to jail.
All right. So
I mean, it's crazy, but I mean, that's what they got.
I want people to follow you, and they can, first of all, let's post your book here. This is Race Crazy
That's it.
by Charles Love, BLM 1619 and the Progressive Racism Movement. We didn't really talk about that topic per se. You are on Twitter as well.
I am.
I can probably find it, but why don't you give us your handle?
I don't even know. I think it's at C Douglas Love 3. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And I'm going to give you a chance to give us some final words before I have the final word.
Oh, so I final, then you final?
Well, my final is I pumped my book for a second. But
oh yeah, your book.
Yeah.
One moment. You talking about this book?
Yes, that book. You're so sweet. Thank you.
See, I have other books. While I'm at it, since I'm going to pump your book up, I got to tell people to buy this one too. This is the other book. This is my second book.
All right. Well, I'll see if I can get that up. So
why don't you I don't know. Final thoughts, just stop being emotional crybabies. Stop thinking you're going to elect the politicians who's going to solve all these problems. No politician, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Biden, Michelle Obama, or whoever you like, they're not going to solve the race thing. They're not going to, we're not going to get rid of hate because people got the right to hate you if they want to, don't care. You police the violence, you lock up violent people, you move on. I got the right to hate Whitey if I want. You got the right to hate me. I don't want to stop. I don't want to police hatred. I don't want people going to jail in America for spray painting Irish. Well, I want them to go to jail for spray painting Irish Lives Matter if they spray painted on my private property. But they can say Irish Lives Matter. Stop thinking you're going to fix the schools by pushing DEI and or by winning the school boards. By all means, run. But you need to fix the curriculum, have standards, meet the standards, and do the things you already know. What happened to everything we need to know in life we learned in kindergarten? Yeah, we need to go back to that. Stop Stop thinking. My last line is stop thinking things are more complicated than they are.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to put a quick promo. You already promoted my book. This is a review on Kirkus, which is unsolicited. What is it? Impartial review. So it's not personal review. But people can take a look at this. They can buy it on Amazon. I think it's a groundbreaking book. It needs more play. So I recommend my audience go do that. Plus, if they buy it, it gets money in my coffers. And then I get to be Elon Musk too, or billionaire.
There you go.
All right. So thank you so much, Charles. This is awesome as usual. And I hope to have you on again soon.
All right. Thanks.